My name is Richard Hale, and at 58 years old I thought I had already lived through the biggest storms a man could endure. Losing friends, losing a marriage, losing pieces of myself along the way. I always believed life throws its hardest punches when you are young and foolish. But I was wrong. Life waits. It waits until you think you are steady, until you think you finally understand who stands beside you and who stands against you. Then when your guard is lowered, when grief fogs your eyes, it hits you again, and harder than before. And that is exactly what happened on the day we buried my father. If you had asked me that morning what the worst part of my day would be, I would have said standing over his casket. I would have said hearing the final prayer. I would have said carrying the weight of losing the only man who taught me how to be a man. But grief, as heavy as it is, was not the sharpest cut I felt that day. No, the deepest wound came from someone who shared my blood, my own sister. My own flesh and blood, who stood in front of that crowded church and announced something so bold, so twisted, so rehearsed, that it changed the entire direction of my life. Before I bring you into that moment, you need to know who my father was. He was not rich by birth. He did not inherit anything but grit. He used to say a person's real value shows in the work they do when nobody is watching, and that man lived by every word of it. Hale and Mason Builders was not a fancy company built on handshakes or empty promises. It was built on blisters, sweat, and long nights fixing mistakes by flashlight because deadlines did not care about exhaustion. I spent 20 years beside him, learning the business from the bottom up. No shortcuts, no favors, just real work. My sister Lauren took a different path. She liked cameras, she liked attention, she liked expensive clothes and the kind of friendships that dried up the second her money stopped flowing. She visited the office the way tourists visit a landmark. She came in, smiled, took pictures, pretended she belonged there, and left before any real work happened. Dad saw it. I saw it. The whole town saw it. Yet she always acted like she was destined to own everything. Dad never said it directly, but I knew I was the one he trusted to keep the company alive. I knew because he let me make the calls. He let me manage the crews. He talked to me late at night over coffee about future plans. And the night before he passed, when he was barely able to speak, he held my hand and whispered a sentence that burned itself into my soul. Take care of the company. Do it the right way, for us, for the family. Those were the last clear words he ever said to me. I carried them inside me the way a soldier carries orders, heavy but honorable. So when the day of his funeral came, I prepared myself to speak about him, about his life, about what he taught me. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what my sister was planning behind the scenes. The church was full, packed to the doors. Old men Dad built houses for. Moms he helped during storms, workers who stood with us through heat and rain. The air felt thick, like grief was hanging just above our heads. I stood near his casket, my hand resting on the polished wood, remembering how he laughed the last time we had a real conversation, remembering how he used to rub his jaw when he was thinking, remembering the way he carried his coffee mug like it was part of him. Then the pastor opened the floor for family to speak. Before I could even step forward, Lauren rose. She wore a fitted black dress that looked more suited for a red carpet than a funeral. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her walk down the aisle was slow, intentional, like she wanted everyone in the room to take notice. She flashed this soft, sad smile, the kind of smile she used whenever she wanted people to trust her, and she stood behind the podium as if that day belonged to her. She started talking about Dad, about love, about connection, about late-night talks she never actually had. The words came out smooth and practiced, like she had memorized them, and even though people nodded politely, I could feel the confusion in the room. Folks knew she had barely visited him in the months before he passed. Folks knew she was more interested in photos than family. But then she said the words that changed everything. Before he passed, Dad signed the business over to me. I am now the owner of Hale and Mason Builders. My stomach dropped. My knees almost buckled. It felt like someone had punched all the air out of my lungs. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, waiting for her to reveal it was some kind of misunderstanding. But her face didn't crack. Her smile didn't slip. She stood there like she was delivering some holy truth, like she expected applause, like the company had always been hers. And she didn't stop there. She looked straight at me, not at the crowd, not at Dad's casket, at me, as if she wanted to watch the shock hit my face, as if she had practiced that moment in a mirror until it felt perfect, as if this was her big performance and I was the one she wanted to destroy. My hands tightened at my sides. I could feel heat rising in my chest, a kind of quiet anger that made the room feel smaller. I wanted to speak, but the words got trapped in my throat. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was knowing she had no shame using our father's funeral as a stage for her lies. But before I could say anything, Dad's longtime business partner, Thomas Mason, stood up. At 81, Thomas moved slower, but he carried a presence you could feel from across the room. His voice had always been deep, steady, commanding. When he started walking down the aisle, people parted for him like he was royalty. Even Lauren stepped back a little, like she didn't expect him to stand up for anyone, especially not for me. He reached the front, planted his cane beside him, and looked around the room with tired but sharp eyes. Then he turned to face the pastor and said something I will never forget. "I think there is something everyone here needs to hear." And in that moment, I felt the entire direction of my life shift. The funeral became a battlefield. The man who raised me became the reason for a war I never asked for. And my sister, the person I once trusted, became the enemy I never imagined facing. That day was not the end of Dad's life. That day was the beginning of the man I was forced to become. Thomas Mason didn't just walk to the front of the church. He arrived there like a storm rolling in, slow and heavy, carrying something everyone could feel but no one could see yet. The murmurs quieted the moment he took his place beside the pastor, and for a second, the entire room seemed to inhale at the same time. Every eye in that church turned to him, but his eyes were locked on one person, Lauren. And the way she stiffened told me everything. She wasn't expecting him. She wasn't prepared for him, and she sure as hell wasn't ready for what he was about to bring into that room. My father's coffin sat right behind me, polished and cold, and I felt its presence like a hand on my shoulder, steady, grounding. But when Thomas started speaking, even that didn't stop the way my heart kicked inside my chest. His voice was low, firm, the kind of voice that comes from a man who spent his entire life choosing words carefully. He said he wanted everyone to hear the truth about my father's final wishes, the truth about the company, the truth that someone in this room had desperately tried to bury. He said Dad wanted me, Richard, to take over Mason Industries. He said Dad told him that directly, clearly, and without hesitation. Not once, not twice, but multiple times during the last days in the hospital. I felt my throat tighten because I'd been there for those days. I'd been there for the long nights and the harder mornings. But hearing another man confirm it, it hit me somewhere deep. And then Thomas reached into his coat, slow and deliberate, like he was pulling out something sacred, and he was. A folder, thick, sealed, official. He held it up so everyone could see it. The pastor, the board members, Dad's old friends, even the relatives who showed up just to judge our family for sport. Thomas said the folder held the final amendments to the company ownership, signed, dated, witnessed, legally filed with the company attorney. Everything real, everything final. Everything Dad wanted. For a moment, my ears buzzed. My knees almost gave out with relief. All the weight I'd been carrying since Dad died, every doubt, every fear that my sister had somehow tricked her way into controlling everything he'd built, lifted just a little. But Lauren, she didn't crack. She didn't shake. She didn't even blink. She walked toward Thomas like she was stepping onto a stage she owned, with that same smug composure she used whenever she manipulated someone into believing she was the victim. She lifted her chin, pointed her perfectly manicured finger, and said Thomas must be mistaken. She said Dad wasn't in his right mind during those final days. She claimed the documents were forged, or that Dad was coerced, or that I pressured him. Me. The same son who spent every night in a hospital recliner, sometimes holding Dad's hand when he couldn't sleep, spoon-feeding him soup when he was too weak to lift his own arms. And there she was, in front of all these people, our family, our friends, Dad's employees, turning his death into a stage for her lies. The room erupted. People whispered like bees buzzing in every corner. Some shook their heads at her, and the disappointment in their eyes was sharp, almost painful to see. Others looked at me, and I could feel their pity hitting me like darts. I didn't want pity. I wanted the truth to burn through every lie she spoke. The pastor tried to calm everyone down, even raising his hands for silence, but it was too late. The energy had changed. The air felt hot, charged, dangerous. And inside me, a fire I'd been holding back for years started to rise. I wanted to shout. I wanted to drag every lie Lauren had ever told into the light. I wanted to tell them how she'd manipulated Dad when he was grieving Mom, how she only visited him when she needed something, how she treated the company like her birthright, even though she never lifted a finger to earn it. But Dad's coffin was right there, and I couldn't disrespect him, not on his day, not at his funeral. So I swallowed everything, my anger, my heartbreak, my rage, until it tasted like metal on my tongue. I just stood there, breathing slowly, gripping the side of the podium so hard my knuckles went white. Then Thomas looked at me, just one look, a small nod, but I understood exactly what it meant. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. This was only the beginning. And Lauren, she knew it too. Because her face, her posture, her whole act changed. The moment she realized she was losing control, she spun around, her heels slamming against the church floor like gunshots echoing through the space. She didn't stay. She didn't look back. She didn't sit through the burial. She didn't stand with the rest of us as we lowered our father into the ground. She didn't even offer a fake tear or a shaky goodbye. She left that church fueled by anger, humiliation, and something far worse, the determination to destroy anything that threatened her plan. And trust me when I say this, she didn't go home to cry. She went home to plot. And she plotted hard. The morning after we lowered Dad into the ground, when the flowers were still fresh on his grave, and the dirt hadn't even settled, Lauren walked into Mason Industries like she was marching onto a battlefield she believed she already won. She didn't knock. She didn't ask. She didn't acknowledge the employees who murmured condolences as they passed my office. She just stormed down the hallway with her heels clapping against the hardwood floors, echoing through the building like she wanted everyone to know she was back, and she wasn't coming quietly. I was in the conference room, still sorting through Dad's old documents, trying to make sense of everything he left behind when she burst through the door. Her hair was perfect, makeup untouched, clothes crisp, like she hadn't buried her father the day before. She slammed a thick stack of papers onto the conference table so hard the pens jumped. Then she pointed at them with a shaky, angry finger and said Dad had promised her part of the business years ago, that he had talked to her in private, that he had always intended for her to have authority over major decisions. It was all rehearsed, like she had practiced her lines in the car before coming in. She talked fast, too fast, the way she always did when she was nervous or spinning something she knew wasn't true. She kept packing, turning her head dramatically from one person to another as if she were giving a speech in front of a jury. I just watched her, feeling the weight of Dad's words from Thomas's folder still fresh in my mind. These were lies, desperate, sloppy lies, but lies spoken with her signature confidence. It made my stomach twist. When I finally spoke, I kept my voice calm, steady, the opposite of the storm she brought in with her. I told her the truth. Dad had left everything, every share, every responsibility, every final instruction about the company to me. Not because I asked, not because I pushed, not because I manipulated, but because I was the one who showed up. I was the one who stayed by his side. I was the one he trusted to protect the legacy he built from nothing. She rolled her eyes with so much disrespect it could have cut through steel. She laughed under her breath, that sharp, mocking laugh she used on people she believed were beneath her. And then she leaned across the table, close enough that I could smell the expensive perfume she always drowned herself in, and told me I had one chance, just one, to split the company with her 50-50. She said if I refused, she would handle things her way. And the way she said it, her voice so calm, her smile so cold. It told me everything. This wasn't about fairness. This wasn't about Dad. This wasn't even about the company. This was about control, power, ego. I told her no. One word, but that one word dropped between us like a bomb. Her expression changed instantly, her eyes darkened, her jaw tight, and her mouth curled into that bitter little smirk she wore whenever someone dared to challenge her. She didn't argue, she didn't shout. She just grabbed her stack of papers, snapped them against her arm, and walked out. Her silence was louder than yelling, and in that silence I felt it, something had started, something ugly, something that wasn't going to end peacefully. Within 48 hours, the damage began. Old clients, people who had known my father for decades, started calling me with strange questions, their voices cautious, almost embarrassed. They asked if I was stepping down. They asked if the company was unstable. They asked if rumors were true about financial trouble or internal disagreements. At first I thought they were mixed up, maybe reacting to Dad's death or misreading an article online. But the more calls I got, the more obvious it became. This wasn't confusion. This was deliberate. Lauren had started spreading rumors like wildfire, whispering to contractors, hinting things to board members, turning Dad's friends into doubters. She told people I was too emotional to run the business, that grief had made me unstable, that Dad had always wanted her in charge, but I had manipulated him in his final days. She even dragged Thomas into it, claiming he was covering up misconduct to protect me. It was vicious, calculated. And most terrifying of all, it worked faster than I ever imagined. In 3 days, I went from receiving sympathy calls about Dad to receiving suspicion, pressure, and doubt from people who once trusted the Mason family with their entire livelihoods. But none of that compared to what hit me at home. It was late, maybe close to 11 p.m. when I finally sat down in my old recliner. I remember the exhaustion sinking into my bones, heavier than anything I'd felt in weeks. I closed my eyes, thinking maybe I'd fall asleep there, but something kept nagging me. A feeling, a heaviness in the room. I don't know why, but I opened my eyes and noticed the edge of a small white paper sticking out from under my front door. No footsteps outside. No noise. No knocking. Just a single piece of paper, slid under quietly, like someone didn't want to be seen. I got up slowly, my heart beating in that strange, anticipatory way it does when you know something is about to change. I picked up the paper. No envelope, no name, no signature, nothing but one single sentence written in ink that looked slightly smudged, maybe from an unsteady hand. You don't know the full story about what your sister did before Dad died. That was it. 10 words. 10 words that hit harder than every rumor, every argument, every threat Lauren had thrown so far. The handwriting looked shaky, like someone old or scared, or maybe both. I read it once, then again, then a third time. Each time the words felt heavier, colder, sharper. Because deep down, so deep I had never said it out loud, I knew there was something Lauren was hiding. I felt it whenever she avoided talking about Dad's final week. I felt it when she skipped hospital visits. I felt it at the funeral, when she pushed everyone away and acted like she was protecting a secret no one else was allowed to touch. And that letter, that anonymous little scrap of paper, confirmed that whatever she was hiding wasn't small. It wasn't petty. It wasn't something that could be brushed under the rug. It was something poisonous. Something dangerous. Something that was about to explode. And that letter, that was only the first drop of poison. Many more were coming. I could feel it. 2 weeks after we lowered Dad into the ground, I found myself standing in the doorway of his home office, feeling like an intruder in a place that used to be so familiar. The room still smelled like him, a mix of sawdust, old coffee, and the worn leather of the chair he had used for more than 20 years. I didn't go in to take anything. I didn't go in to split property or organize files. I just needed something, some connection. Some lingering piece of him that hadn't been erased by grief or by the storm my sister had started. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting stripes across the framed blueprints on the walls, the dusty bookshelves, and the desk where Dad had fallen asleep more times than either of us could count. I breathed in, steadied myself, and started opening drawers. Slow, gentle, like touching something fragile. There were old receipts, paint samples, handwritten notes, and that stack of yellow legal pads he loved to write on even after the company switched to digital documents. I found old letters from friends, a few photographs I had never seen before. Dad fishing with Thomas, Mom and Dad laughing at a picnic years before she passed. These memories were like small surprises, little glimpses into a life that felt far away but still warm. But then I opened the bottom drawer of the file cabinet, the one with the stiff metal slider that always stuck, and something inside shifted. Something heavy, something out of place. I pulled harder, and the drawer finally came loose enough for me to see the object sitting at the back. A locked middle box. My breath caught. I recognized it instantly. Dad had owned that box since I was a teenager. He kept important documents inside, insurance papers, backup contracts, emergency forms. Things he said were only to be opened when life gets sideways. But something felt different now. The box looked heavier, fuller, like it had been hiding secrets of its own. I carried it to the desk and sat down in his old chair. For a long minute I just stared at it, my fingers resting on the cool metal handle. It felt wrong to open it. It felt like crossing a line. But then I thought about the letter someone had slipped under my door, the tremor in the handwriting, the warning that I didn't know the full story. And suddenly this box felt necessary. It felt like the first step toward the truth. Dad kept the key taped underneath the desk. I found it easily, same spot it had always been. My hand shook slightly as I slid it into the lock. When the box clicked open, the sound echoed inside the empty house like something final breaking. Inside, instead of the usual neatly stacked folders, I found letters. Dozens of them, maybe 50 or 60, all still sealed, all addressed to my father, and all from the same place, the hospital's financial department. A cold weight dropped into my stomach. Why would Dad keep medical bills sealed? Why would he hide them? Why would he put them somewhere he never expected anyone to find anytime soon? I picked one envelope up and slid my thumb under the flap. As I pulled out the first letter, I felt my pulse pounding against my neck. And when I scanned the paper, the words blurred for a second before snapping into focus. Unpaid medical invoices. Thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands. Bills for treatments that should have been fully covered under Dad's insurance. Bills marked as overdue. Bills that had been resent multiple times. I opened another, then another, then another. Each one telling the same story: charges denied, treatments halted, approvals reversed. My heart sank deeper with every paper I read. I could feel my chest tightening as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Insurance revoked. Beneficiary changed. Primary authorization removed. All changed before Dad died. I read the name on the change authorization line once, then again, and a third time, even though I already knew what I would see. It was signed by Lauren. My vision blurred for a moment as heat surged through my face. My hands clenched so tightly around the paper that it wrinkled. I tried to breathe, but all I could think about was Dad lying in that hospital bed, weak and exhausted, trusting us, trusting her. And she had gone behind his back. She had tampered with his insurance. She had rerouted funds. She had allowed his treatments to be slowed down or questioned. She had taken advantage of the chaos in those final months and quietly redirected money from his medical accounts into accounts in her own name. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip-up. This was calculated. She didn't just try to steal the company. She drained our father while he was dying. I felt sick. My knees actually shook. I lowered the papers onto the desk because my hands weren't steady enough to hold them anymore. My throat felt tight, and for a second I thought I might actually throw up. Dad trusted her. He trusted all of us. And she had used that trust to bleed him dry, financially and emotionally, while he was fighting for his life. I leaned forward, pressing my palms into the desk and stared down at the scattered letters. Every one of them was proof, not rumors, not whispers, not the emotional accusations siblings sometimes throw at each other. These were official documents with signatures, dates, and clear trails of authorization. She had done this. She had watched Dad's health decline and decided it was an opportunity. She had looked at our father, not as a parent who raised us, loved us, fought for us, but as a door to money and control. My jaw locked until it hurt. I felt something shift inside me, something hard and cold like a steel rod sliding into place. That was the moment I knew the fight had changed. This wasn't about the company anymore. This wasn't about reputation. This was about betrayal at the deepest, most unforgivable level. She wanted a war. Fine. But mine would be different, not loud, not sloppy, not built on lies. My revenge would be clean, quiet, methodical, and when it finally struck, she wouldn't be able to stand, let alone recover. She had taken advantage of a dying man. Now she would learn what it felt like when a living one stood up. The morning after I found those letters, I drove straight to Thomas Mason's house. The sky was still gray with dawn, and the air had that cold bite that creeps in right before winter fully settles in. Thomas lived in a small brick house on the east side of town, the same house he'd lived in since I was a kid. He opened the door slowly, leaning on that old cane of his, and when he saw my face, he didn't even ask what was wrong. He just stepped aside and said to come in. I laid the letters on his kitchen table one by one until the stack looked like a silent mountain of betrayal. Thomas sat down, adjusted his glasses, and started reading. His hand shook just a little, and his jaw tightened more with every page. He didn't speak, not for 10 minutes, not for 20. The only sounds in the room were the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft shuffle of paper. When he finally leaned back, he closed his eyes as if the truth itself weighed him down. "Richard," he said, his voice low, "I always had a feeling something was off. I just never imagined it was this deep." His words hit me hard. Thomas had known my father longer than anyone alive. If he suspected something, then this wasn't some sloppy mistake Lauren had made at the last minute. This was deliberate, pre-planned. She'd been setting the stage long before Dad took his final breath. Thomas rubbed a hand across his forehead, and for the first time I saw something in his face, a kind of guilt, a heaviness. "I should have said something sooner," he murmured. "I just didn't want to accuse your sister without proof." Proof? That one word sat between us like a stone. Now we had proof. And it was worse than anything either of us had imagined. Thomas stood up slowly and walked to a drawer near the sink. He pulled out a small address book, an old one, the kind with worn edges and names written in faded ink. He flipped to the middle and tapped a name with his finger. "Paul Owens." "He's an old friend," Thomas said. "Retired now. Used to work as a forensic auditor, sharp as a razor, doesn't miss a thing." 2 hours later, Thomas and I were sitting in Paul's living room. The place smelled like old books and black tea, and Paul had this calm, steady presence that made you feel like he'd seen every kind of deception the world had to offer. He greeted us with a nod, motioned us to sit, and took the stack of documents without a single question. He spent the entire afternoon going through everything: Dad's hospital bills, the insurance letters, the business records I brought, and even internal financial logs from the company database. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He handled every page like it was part of a puzzle he'd solved 1,000 times. Every now and then, he'd raise an eyebrow or let out a soft hum under his breath, but he didn't say anything until he had seen it all. Finally, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the room started filling with shadows, Paul set the last page down and folded his hands. His verdict came out slow but sharp. "Richard, your sister has been siphoning money for years." I felt the words land in my chest like a hammer. He explained how she moved small amounts, just enough to avoid attention, but enough to drain accounts over time. He showed us spreadsheets where numbers didn't line up, micro-transfers she routed through dummy accounts, and financial trails she tried to bury. Then he dropped the biggest blow. "Your father's signature on that insurance transfer, it's forged." My stomach turned. I actually felt my skin go cold. Dad's handwriting had always been steady, even when he was sick. Seeing a crooked imitation of it on official documents made my hands curl into fists. Paul continued, still calm, still methodical. "She didn't do this in a moment of panic. She planned it. The timing, the amounts, the way she covered her tracks. This wasn't impulsive. She prepared for this." Prepared. She had been prepping to take money from Dad, from the company, from his legacy, from everything he built with his own sweat and the calluses on his hands. I stared at the documents on Paul's coffee table, the pages spread out like a road map of betrayal. I saw Dad's name printed again and again, next to charges he never should have had to pay. I saw the signatures, the dates, the patterns. And I saw Lauren. Not the little sister who used to ask me to walk her home from school. Not the teenager who once cried when she broke Dad's favorite mug. No. I saw a woman who had turned greed into a lifestyle. A woman who saw a father's slow decline and chose to profit from it. A woman who smiled at his bedside while quietly draining him dry. A sharp heat climbed up my neck, and for the first time in my life, I felt a kind of anger I didn't recognize. Not the kind that exploded. Not the kind that shouted. This anger was deeper, quieter. It settled into my bones like molten metal cooling into steel. Paul must have seen something in my face, because he leaned forward. "I know you're upset," he said, "but listen carefully. If you move too fast, she'll cover her tracks. She's smart. She's calculated. You need to be smarter." Smarter. The word echoed inside me like a challenge. Thomas placed a hand on my shoulder, not to hold me back but to steady me. "Your father trusted you," he said softly. "He knew this was coming. He changed everything for a reason." And that was the moment I realized the full truth. Dad hadn't just changed the company ownership because he believed in me. He changed it because he discovered what Lauren was doing. He knew she was stealing from him. He knew she was draining accounts. He knew she had turned into something dangerous. And he was trying to protect his legacy the only way he could, by putting everything in the hands of the one person he trusted to defend it. Me. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders, but instead of crushing me, it steadied me. It focused me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my fist on the table. I didn't lose control. I just nodded slowly. Because the path was clear now. Lauren started this war long before Dad passed. But I was going to finish it. Not with rage. With strategy. With truth. With patience. And when the time came, my revenge would be the kind that left no cracks for her to slip through. It would be the kind that exposed her so completely she couldn't twist the story, couldn't spin the narrative, couldn't fake another smile. She wanted to play dirty. Fine. I would play smarter. And this time, the truth was on my side. Revenge doesn't always come from fury. Sometimes it comes from clarity, from that cold moment when the pain settles and turns into purpose. After everything I had discovered, after the letters, the forged signatures, the quiet theft that started long before Dad took his last breath, I realized something important. I didn't want a messy fight. I didn't want screaming matches or dramatic showdowns. I wanted justice. I wanted truth. I wanted the world to see her for who she had become. And more than anything, I wanted Dad's name cleared of the shadow she had thrown over it. The first step was sitting down with my lawyer, a man who had known our family for years, someone Dad trusted. When he read the documents, when he saw the statements, the altered insurance forms, the transfers, the letters that Dad never should have received, the man actually leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face as if the weight of it hit him just as hard. He spoke to me quietly, almost gently, like he wasn't sure how much I could handle, and he said that if we pursued legal action, Lauren's entire world would fall apart. Fraud, forgery, financial manipulation, intentional harm, elder abuse. There were so many potential charges that it didn't even feel real. It felt like a movie script, like something that happened to other families, not mine. And for a moment, I felt that sick twist in my stomach again. She was my sister, the girl who shared the backseat with me on family road trips, who cried when she skinned her knee, who once slept on the floor of my room because she was scared of thunderstorms. Part of me still saw that version of her, still hoped that maybe this was all some misunderstanding, some desperate mistake she made when she felt cornered or afraid. But then I saw the forged signature again. I saw Dad's name shaking slightly on the page because it wasn't his hand that wrote it. I saw the withdrawn amounts, the altered policy documents, the suspicious timing, and the smaller part of me that still wanted to protect her shrank. Choices define people, and she had made hers long before any of this began. So we built a plan, not a loud one, not some soap opera confrontation. A quiet, methodical, controlled plan that didn't rely on emotion, only evidence. My lawyer helped me organize everything. Every letter, every bank statement, every suspicious transfer, every document Dad never signed. We contacted the hospital. At first the staff hesitated. They didn't want to be involved. But when they heard what happened, when they saw the altered paperwork, 2 nurses and 1 administrator agreed to speak on record. They remembered Lauren. They remembered her aggressively questioning billing statements, insisting she was the one responsible for approvals, pushing to redirect treatment schedules and insurance authorizations. One nurse even said Lauren told her, "Dad doesn't need the most expensive treatment. He won't be around long enough to use it." Hearing that nearly made my breath stop. But again, instead of exploding, I held it. I kept everything inside, locked down tight, because rage was a weapon that could destroy me just as easily as her, and I needed to stay sharp. Thomas helped too. He contacted old contractors, longtime clients, anyone who had heard Lauren's whispers. Several admitted that she had tried to sabotage the company, spreading lies about my leadership, claiming Dad always wanted her in control. One even said that Lauren hinted I was unstable after Dad's death, that I was too emotional to make smart decisions. It was disgusting. But the more she lied, the more evidence we gathered. Thomas's friend Paul, the forensic auditor, dug deeper and found something Lauren never expected anyone to look for. Multiple accounts she'd opened in her name, then linked to the company under vague vendor labels. Years of tiny withdrawals. $15 here, $80 there, sometimes larger ones hidden under fake invoices. It wasn't enough to bankrupt us, but it was enough to prove intent, enough to show planning, enough to demonstrate she hadn't made one mistake. She had been building a hidden stream of money for herself for nearly 5 years. Piece by piece, her lies unraveled like a sweater being pulled apart thread by thread. And as we built the case, as we collected documents, interviewed witnesses, secured recordings and statements, I felt something inside me shift. The grief was still there, the anger too, but beneath all of it, a strange calm began to grow. Because for the first time since Dad died, I felt control returning to my hands. Lauren thought she was winning. She was still out there smiling, attending charity events, pretending to be the innocent daughter pushed aside by her selfish brother. She was busy painting herself as the martyr while I stayed silent, and that silence fooled her. She thought I was weak. She thought I was scared. She thought I was drowning in the chaos she created. But while she was busy fighting to convince the world she deserved the company, I was preparing something far stronger. The truth. Truth that didn't shout. Truth that didn't break. Truth that would bury every false claim she had ever made. And when the time came, that truth would hit her harder than any shout ever could. 3 months after the funeral, when the weight of grief had settled into something quieter but heavier, the company scheduled its annual shareholders' meeting, a gathering that usually felt like a formality, a room full of familiar faces, people who had known my father for decades, people who had watched me grow from the kid sweeping floors in the warehouse to the man running operations beside him. But this time, nothing felt familiar. The energy in the room carried a different kind of charge, an unspoken tension that pressed against the walls, thick enough to taste. Contractors sat a little straighter. Board members whispered among themselves. Old partners, the kind who remembered my father's first blueprint sketches, walked in with cautious eyes. Even the city inspector, a man who never attended unless there was a crisis, took a seat near the front with his arms crossed like he already expected a storm. And then there was Lauren. She didn't just enter, she arrived, like she wanted the entire room to feel her presence before she'd even said a word. She wore a sharp charcoal suit, tailored to perfection, her hair slicked back into a style that screamed control. Confidence rolled off her like heavy perfume. She didn't look like someone caught in lies or someone standing on the edge of a cliff. She looked like someone ready to take a throne. She walked straight to the front, heels clicking against the polished floor, and before anyone could greet her, she took position beside the podium. She didn't wait for approval, didn't wait for a cue. She seized the moment like she believed it belonged to her. She cleared her throat, plastered a smile on her face, and launched into her speech. She talked about new leadership, emphasizing the words like the old leadership, meaning me was already a closed chapter. She talked about modernizing the brand, about strengthening partnerships, about revitalizing company culture. She talked about Dad's legacy like she owned it, like she understood it, like she loved it. She wrapped her voice in charm and business jargon, using that performative tone she saved for moments when she wanted the crowd to believe she was the smartest person in the room. I watched her from my seat near Thomas, silent, steady, hands folded carefully so the anger wouldn't show in my grip. She spoke for 10 minutes straight, packing slightly, gesturing theatrically, performing confidence even as cracks began to show around the edges of her smile. She thought she was warming up the audience. She thought she was convincing them. She thought her spotlight was bright enough to blind everyone to the truth. But then Thomas stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't clear his throat. He simply said her name, softly, calmly, like he was calling someone back from a dangerous ledge. Lauren. She froze mid-sentence, her lips still parted around the words she hadn't finished. She turned toward him with irritation flickering across her face, like he had dared to interrupt a great performer in the middle of her monologue. But Thomas didn't flinch. He walked to the center of the room with the steadiness of someone who had served my father loyally for decades, someone who had carried secrets, responsibilities, and burdens without ever dropping a single one. In his hands, he held a stack of folders, thick, heavy, identical folders. Without drama, without flourish, he began handing them out, one to every person in the room. Contractors, board members, partners, the inspector, even the receptionist who had stepped in to take notes. One by one, he placed a folder in front of each individual like he was laying down evidence in a courtroom. Lauren's smile stuttered, not disappeared yet, just flickered, like a light bulb catching its first warning. Someone opened their folder. Then another. And another. The room shifted. It went completely still, like the air itself had stopped breathing. The silence felt heavy, pressing down like someone had lowered an invisible ceiling onto all of us. People began flipping pages slowly at first, then faster, like they couldn't believe what they were seeing but also couldn't turn away. Inside each folder was everything. Every piece of proof. Every lie stripped bare. every secret she thought she buried, the forged insurance documents with her altered signatures, the financial transfers she tried to disguise as vendor fees, the medical bills Dad never should have received, the digital records showing she changed his insurance information, the emails she sent to clients spreading rumors about me, the audit trail Paul had reconstructed with meticulous detail, the testimonies from hospital staff who saw the irregularities, the time-stamped withdrawals, the hidden accounts, the deception stretching back years. It was all there, laid out like a map of her betrayal. As people read, the expressions around the room shifted in slow motion. Shock, confusion, anger, disbelief. A few looked up at her with faces that said they wished, truly wished, it wasn't real. But the evidence sat right in front of them, undeniable, unshakable, ink and numbers and signatures woven into a complete betrayal. Lauren's smile vanished, not all at once, inch by inch, like it was melting off her face. Her posture changed, her shoulders tightened, her breathing grew shallow. The confidence she had worn so boldly only minutes before evaporated, leaving something raw and shaken underneath. She kept glancing at the pages like they couldn't possibly be hers, like someone had fabricated the entire thing as a cruel joke. Her eyes darted to me, searching my face for a sign, a crack, a hesitation, something she could grab onto. But I didn't look away. I didn't blink. She whispered, barely audible, What is this?" No one answered her. She looked at Thomas, betrayal twisting across her features, but he didn't respond either. He simply folded his hands behind his back, standing as steady and silent as a stone pillar. And then her eyes landed on me. Wide, panicked, almost pleading, like she expected me to stand up and tell everyone to stop reading, to explain this away, to protect her from the monstrous truth she had created with her own hands. But I didn't say a word. Not yet. My silence broke her more than any accusation ever could. When the last page stopped rustling and the room finally settled into this heavy, stunned silence, something happened that I will never forget. Every head slowly turned toward me. Not toward Thomas, not toward the board, not toward the folders spread across the table. Me. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the one person who had stayed quiet the longest to finally speak. And for the first time since Dad died, I felt something steady rise up inside me. Not anger, not vengeance, just clarity, a sense of purpose, like all the noise of the past months finally sharpened into one straight line. I stood feeling the weight of every eye in that room, and I let the quiet stretch for a moment because the truth needed space. It needed gravity. It needed to land. When I spoke, I made sure my voice didn't shake. I told them I wasn't there to destroy my sister. I wasn't there to humiliate her. I wasn't there to make a show out of a broken family. I was there to protect my father's legacy. I told them about the man who built this company with his own hands, who taught me how to hold a tool before I could spell my own name, who showed me that integrity wasn't a speech, it was a lifestyle. I told them about the nights Dad worked in the garage when the company had nothing but 2 clients and a hope, about the days he'd show up to every job site, boots dusty, hair messy, smile tired but proud, about the people he helped, the employees he treated like family, the values he left behind. Then I told them about his last real request. The conversation he had with me in that hospital room when the machines beeped in slow rhythm and his voice was barely more than a whisper. He told me he wanted the company safe. He wanted honesty to stay at the heart of it. He wanted the business to continue, but only under someone who would protect it and the people who depended on it. He wanted me to take care of what he built. I didn't share those words to hurt Lauren. I shared them because they mattered, because the truth deserved daylight after being buried so long. While I spoke, Lauren shifted in her seat like she was sitting on broken glass. Her eyes darted from me to the door to the folders in front of her, like she was trying to find an exit that didn't exist. Her lips trembled, but she kept herself composed just long enough for me to finish. Then when I finally sat down, she cracked. She pushed her chair back so fast it screeched across the floor. Her voice came out high, thin, desperate. She said she needed the money. She said Dad told her she could take what she needed. She said I misunderstood everything. She said Thomas had manipulated the records. She even said, her voice breaking in this strange, panicked pitch, that I forged the documents. Her hands shook as she tried to flip through the papers, searching for anything that could save her, but the harder she tried, the worse it looked. Every page contradicted her claims. Every signature, every timestamp, every bank transfer exposed another layer of her deception. The board members didn't buy it. You could see it in the way they leaned back, the way they folded their arms, the way they exchanged glances that said they'd already made up their minds. The contractors looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats like witnessing her lies physically pained them. The inspector raised his brows, unimpressed and unmoved. Then she made her second mistake. She turned on Thomas. She pointed at him like a child caught stealing cookies and said he was orchestrating this whole thing. Said he had always favored me. Said he had a vendetta, but Thomas didn't even blink. He stood still, his expression calm, almost sad, like he was watching someone drown in shallow water and refusing to stand up. Her voice cracked again when she realized no one was jumping to defend her. No one was nodding. No one was encouraging her story. The room remained solidly, painfully against her. When she tried to flee, tried to grab her purse and storm out like she had at Dad's funeral, she didn't make it 3 steps. The board chair spoke her name in a tone that carried authority she couldn't outrun. He told her to sit, and for the first time in months, she did. Her legs wobbled as she lowered herself back down, eyes wide and shiny like she couldn't comprehend what was happening. And that's when the vote began. No speeches. No negotiations. No attempts to soften the blow. Each board member cast their vote with a single word. Remove. 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 Her name fell out of every mouth like it weighed nothing at all. Lauren was stripped of all involvement in the company, not suspended, not paused, not pending review, completely removed, permanently, her access revoked, her authority erased, her connection severed. Then came the second vote. The decision to confirm me as the sole owner. This time the votes came faster. Approve. Approve. Unanimous. When the chair announced it officially, something inside me loosened, something that had been tied in knots since the day we buried Dad. I didn't smile, didn't celebrate, didn't even let out a breath of relief. I just nodded quietly, respectfully, like I was accepting something sacred, not something won. Lauren didn't take it quietly. She stood up with tears streaking down her face, not tears of remorse or guilt, but the tears of someone who finally realized the game she'd been playing had run out of moves. She looked around the room for even one ally, one supporter, one person who still believed in her. But she found none. She whispered something, maybe an insult, maybe a plea, maybe a denial. I couldn't tell. Then she turned and walked out with quick, uneven steps, her shoulders shaking, her breath hitching like she couldn't get air. The door closed behind her. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the room exhaled. Everyone looked back at me, some with sympathy, some with respect, some with a quiet understanding of the cost of family betrayal. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about victory. I was thinking about Dad. And about how choices always find their consequences, sooner or later. 2 weeks after the confrontation, when the echoes of the shareholders' meeting had begun to fade into the background of my daily life, a small envelope appeared under my front door. It wasn't flashy. No return address, no decoration, no hint of ceremony. Just a simple cream-colored envelope with my name written in careful, looping handwriting. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hand, and something in me tightened. I had grown used to letters in the past months, threatening, accusatory, veiled with secrets, but this one felt different, softer, quieter, almost human. I tore it open with deliberate care and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The words made my chest tighten before I even read them all. The letter was from Nurse Margaret, the woman who had cared for Dad during his final days, the one who had quietly watched over him while the rest of us slept or worked or argued. Her handwriting was precise, neat, almost like she wanted to make sure every word was carried exactly as she felt it. She apologized first. Apologized for not speaking sooner, for letting the months pass without telling anyone the truth, for feeling powerless in the face of Lauren's manipulation, for standing by while a man she cared for so deeply was taken advantage of in his final days. Her words were humble, weighted with sincerity, but what came next cut straight through me. She wrote that Dad had been heartbroken when he discovered what Lauren had done, not just frustrated or angry, heartbroken. That alone stopped me. I pictured him in that hospital bed, frail, tubes running through his arms, yet fully aware of the deceit happening under his nose. That Dad who had taught me how to lift a beam, to measure a board, to honor a handshake, had been left to grapple with the knowledge that someone he loved had betrayed him. But then Nurse Margaret wrote something that made my throat ache in a way nothing else had. She said that even in that heartbreak, Dad still loved Lauren. He told Margaret he hoped that someday Lauren would find her way back to being a good person. That despite all the harm, despite the lies, despite the money she stole, despite the betrayal that could have destroyed a family, he still held a hope for her. A hope for her redemption. I sank into the porch chair, the envelope still clutched in my hand. The autumn wind brushed across my face, scattering leaves across the walkway, and for the first time in months I allowed myself to feel the full depth of what had happened. The anger, the betrayal, the scheming, it had all led here. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about understanding. It was about love, complicated, messy, and human. I thought about Dad. About how he had carried us both in his heart, how he had built a life and a company and values with every ounce of strength he had, knowing that one of us might falter, knowing that life didn't come with guarantees. I thought about Lauren, and even in my quiet moments of stillness, I couldn't hate her entirely. She had made choices, but she was still my sister. And Dad had loved both of us, fiercely, unconditionally, even when one of us had turned away from everything he held dear. I let the tears come then. Real tears, not the controlled ones I had shed in meetings or over spreadsheets, not the bitter tears that came from anger or planning. These were the kind of tears that fall deep into the soul, the kind that carry grief, relief, love, and understanding all at once. I cried harder than I had at the funeral, harder than I had in months of sleepless nights filled with rage and plotting. I cried because Dad's love was bigger than any betrayal, because even in the darkest moments, he still saw the good in his children, even when one of us had failed him. The letter sat on my lap, fluttering slightly in the breeze, and I realized that this quiet acknowledgement of truth, this final piece of his heart reaching out to both of us, was more powerful than any courtroom, any evidence, any victory I could ever achieve. Dad had left us a legacy of integrity, of resilience, of family bound not just by blood, but by the enduring capacity to forgive and to hope. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table beside me. For the first time in months, I felt a kind of peace. Not the absence of pain, not the forgetting of betrayal, but the presence of love, the presence of a father's unwavering hope. And I understood then that revenge, as satisfying as it had been, was not the end. The end was this: carrying forward what Dad had built, honoring his memory, and living a life that, in the quiet moments, made him proud. Even after betrayal, even after lies, even after loss. Because Dad loved both of us. And maybe in the end, that was the truest kind of justice of all. I am 58 years old, and in those 58 years I have weathered storms that would have broken a weaker spine. I have stood through business collapses, personal heartbreaks, losses that made it hard to breathe, and long nights where sleep felt like a luxury life was no longer willing to give. But even with all that experience, with all those years carved into my skin and my soul, nothing, and I mean nothing, ever prepares you for the moment you realize the knife in your back belongs to someone who shares your blood. There is no handbook for that kind of pain, no warning siren. It hits you silently, slowly, like ice creeping across warm glass. And by the time you understand what has happened, the damage is already done. But life has a strange way of testing the parts of you that you didn't even know needed testing. Sometimes it's not the storm outside that shakes you. It's the storm someone you love creates in your own home. And in that moment, you stand in front of a mirror and realize you must choose who you want to be. Angry, vengeful, bitter. Or do you choose something harder, something colder, steadier, and infinitely more painful? You choose justice. In the end, despite everything Lauren did, despite every lie she told and every line she crossed, I didn't destroy my sister. I didn't drag her name through the mud or do what she expected me to do, explode, break, collapse. No, what I did was something far more powerful, something far more permanent. I simply held the truth up like a mirror. I revealed exactly what she tried to bury under excuses and forged signatures and crocodile tears. And truth, once exposed, is a force no lie can outrun. Lies sprint, truth walks, but truth always arrives. The company survived the storm she created. Somehow, through all the chaos and whispers and late-night boardroom battles, the foundation my father laid with calloused hands and sleepless nights stayed standing. His legacy stayed standing. The name he spent his entire life protecting stayed standing. And in the middle of all that, I realized something I hadn't expected. I survived too. I came out of it bruised, yes. Shaken, absolutely. But standing and stronger than I ever thought I could be at this age. As for Lauren, I don't know where she is emotionally. I don't know if she feels guilt or anger or just embarrassment that her game finally collapsed in front of people she worked so hard to impress. I don't know if she will ever change. People don't transform because you expose them. They transform because something inside them breaks open and demands to be rebuilt. And I don't know if that moment has come for her yet. Maybe one day she will call. Maybe she will sit across from me at a table the way we used to as kids, with no lies between us. Maybe there will be a shaky apology, or maybe she will be too proud for that and simply ask for another chance. And maybe, just maybe, I will be ready to listen, not to forget, not to erase the past, but to acknowledge that even broken relationships deserve the opportunity to heal. But until that day comes, until she finds her way back to the person I hope still exists somewhere under the greed and anger and fear, I carry Dad's last words with me like a compass inside my chest. Do it the right way. For us. For the family. Those were his last instructions, his last gift, his final reminder of the kind of man he expected me to be long after he was gone. And that is exactly what I did, not for revenge, not for triumph, but because some promises outlive even the people who made them. And as long as I am alive, his legacy, his name, and his truth will live with me.